Before concrete and glass, before the skylines of modern cities, there was Rome. Here, architecture was not just construction, it was expression. Temples, arches, basilicas, and public squares all served a purpose beyond function. They projected identity, authority, and belief. Every space was a message, every structure a reflection of Rome's values. This documentary explores how the Romans shaped their world through stone and space. From a cluster of wooden huts beside the Tiber in the 8th century BCE to marble cities planned with mathematical precision, we trace the growth of a civilization that built to last. We will walk through sacred temples and crowded bathhouses, private homes, and monumental forums. We will uncover the meaning behind symmetry, the politics behind layout, and the philosophy that shaped it all. This is a story based on archaeology, ancient texts, and modern historical research. Not myth, not legend. Only what the evidence can support. You are listening to The Architecture of Rome, a journey through the spaces that defined an empire and still define the world today. Chapter 1. The Roman Architectural Mindset. Roman architecture did not begin with arches or domes. It began with an idea that buildings could reflect values, that space could define power, that a city could tell a story, not with words, but with stone. In the early centuries of Rome, architecture was humble. The first homes were made of mud brick and thatch. They stood along the Palatine Hill, near the banks of the Tiber River. This was the 8th century BCE. There were no monuments yet, no marble, no concrete. But the mindset was already there. Buildings faced the rising sun. Shrines were placed in open courtyards. Sacred boundaries were drawn around cities and markets. Even the smaller structures followed rules about order and placement. It was believed that the shape of a space could influence fate. As the city grew, so did the ambition behind its layout. Rome's earliest planners were not architects in the modern sense. They were priests, magistrates, and engineers. They believed that how something was built mattered as much as why it was built. A building's shape, size, and orientation had to align with both religious belief and civic function. By the 6th century BCE, Rome had absorbed influences from neighbouring cultures. The Etruscans, who lived just to the north in what is now central Italy, brought techniques of drainage, masonry, and town planning. Their cities followed a grid, with clear streets and central forums. Rome adopted this model. Streets became straighter. Public spaces were defined by symmetry and proportion. These were not just aesthetic choices, they were philosophical. A straight street suggested discipline. A balanced building showed stability. Geometry was a form of order. This sense of structure appeared everywhere. A temple was not just a place to pray, it had to face the right direction. Its steps had to rise in measured intervals. Its columns had to match its walls. A bathhouse was not just for washing. It was organized by temperature, by light, and by the flow of bodies. Every wall and every arch controlled how people moved. Even the atrium of a wealthy home followed this logic. It was open to the sky, not only for air, but to connect the household with the heavens above. Architecture was used to shape behavior. It guided people through space, made rituals easier to perform, and made power easier to see. In the forum, the placement of the speaker's platform, the alignment of statues, and the size of the surrounding buildings created a space that was not just public, but political. In an amphitheatre, the curved rows and tiered seating reminded everyone of their place in society. Design made status visible. This mindset extended to materials as well. Early Roman builders used local stone, timber, and clay. But as the empire expanded, so did its reach. Imported stone, including fine marble and coloured granites, became part of the design language. These were not just construction choices, they were statements. A building made from imported marble was more than beautiful. It was proof of Rome's power to command resources from across the known world. The belief in meaningful design was also visible in how Romans structured entire cities. From military camps on the frontier to provincial capitals, Roman settlements followed a clear plan. A central forum flanked by key institutions. Straight roads connecting gates. Standardized units of measure. This made cities easier to govern, easier to navigate, and easier to recognize as Roman, no matter how far they were from the capital. To build was to declare intention. To organize space was to organize society. This belief never left Roman architecture, that even when construction techniques improved, even when scale increased, the core remained. Space had meaning. Form had purpose. Buildings were not neutral. They were instruments of culture, control, and continuity. This was the Roman architectural mindset, a way of thinking that turned cities into symbols and made walls speak. Chapter 2: Greek Roots and Roman Innovation. To understand Roman architecture, we must begin with the Greeks. Nearly every major Roman form, including the column, the pediment, the open-air theatre, and the temple, has its origins in the architecture of ancient Greece. But what the Romans inherited, they did not simply copy. They reshaped it, expanded it, and gave it new meaning. By the 3rd century BCE, Roman architects had full access to Greek traditions. Southern Italy, especially the region once known as Magna Graecia, was filled with Greek colonies. Their temples and civic buildings were carefully proportioned, built from cut stone, and elevated on stepped platforms. The Romans admired the balance and clarity of these designs, especially the use of columns to define space and form. The 3 classical orders, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, became the backbone of Roman temple design. Each order carried its own symbolic weight. Doric columns, plain and heavy, suggested strength. Ionic columns, with their spiral capitals, conveyed grace. Corinthian columns, richly decorated with carved leaves, became the Roman favourite. The Romans preferred grandeur. The Corinthian order allowed for the most ornamentation, the most height, and the greatest visual impact. The Greeks built for harmony. The Romans built for scale. A Greek temple was designed to be viewed from outside. It invited admiration, not entry. A Roman temple was meant to be approached, mounted, and entered. A Greek theatre used a hillside to support its tiers. The Romans built their amphitheatres from the ground up using arches and vaults. Greek buildings framed the landscape. Roman buildings redefined it. The most important difference was material. Greek builders used stone blocks, carefully cut and fitted. Roman builders used concrete, a mixture of lime, volcanic ash, and water. Known as opus cementitium, this material hardened into a durable mass and allowed for entirely new shapes. Arches, vaults, domes, and vast interiors became possible. Concrete was faster, cheaper, lighter, and more adaptable than cut stone. It allowed the Romans to build quickly and on a scale never before seen. With this material, Roman engineers created structures that were no longer bound by the weight of stone. They could span wide distances, raise immense ceilings, and mould interiors into complex forms. In the provinces, they used this technology to quickly create cities that looked, felt, and functioned like Rome. Greek architecture emphasized proportion and restraint. Roman architecture embraced spectacle. The Greeks designed for civic pride. The Romans designed to impress, to dominate, and to endure. A Roman building was a political tool. It projected Roman values, even in places far from the capital. Greek city-states were small and independent. Their architecture reflected local ideals. Rome ruled over a vast empire. Its architecture had to communicate authority across thousands of kilometers, or more than 1,000 miles. A Roman building had to speak clearly in places where Latin was not understood. It had to show what Rome stood for, even without words. Even in private life, the Romans borrowed and adapted. Wealthy homes included Greek-style courtyards, mosaics, and imported sculptures. But Roman homes were more than private retreats. They were places for public display, for negotiation, and for politics. The Greek idea of inward living was transformed into a Roman statement of status. This approach extended to military and civic spaces as well. In newly conquered regions, Rome imposed its vision of order by building forums, baths, and temples in the same layout used in Italy. Architecture became a soft weapon of empire. It instructed locals how to behave, where to gather, and what power looked like. It created a Roman identity where none had existed before. What began as imitation became transformation. Roman builders took Greek aesthetics and applied them to new functions. The temple became a civic monument. The colonnade became a marketplace. The decorative became structural. Every borrowed element was adapted to Roman needs. This combination of Greek form and Roman function created a new architectural identity. Rome did not invent its style, but it expanded it, elevated it, and sent it across the known world. Not as a copy, but as a message. It spoke of empire, of ambition, and of permanence in stone. Chapter 3: Temples and Sacred Geometry. To the Romans, a temple was more than a building. It was a bridge between the mortal world and the divine. Every dimension, every angle, every line was meant to channel order from the heavens into the heart of the city. This was not superstition. It was geometry with purpose. It was architecture as ritual. The origins of Roman temple design trace back to the Etruscans, the people who lived in what is now central Italy before Rome's rise. Their temples were rectangular, built on high podiums with deep porches and wide staircases. Unlike Greek temples, which were designed to be seen from all sides, Etruscan and later Roman temples were built to face forward. This gave the structure a clear front, a sense of arrival, and a theatrical quality that suited Roman ritual. By the 4th century BCE, Roman temples began to integrate elements from Greek architecture. Columns were added, often in the Ionic or Corinthian styles. Marble replaced terracotta. Proportions became more refined, but the essential layout remained uniquely Roman. A high platform, a central cella or inner chamber, and a focus on frontal approach. The design created a powerful visual hierarchy. The gods were above, both physically and spiritually. Temples were aligned according to sacred principles. Roman surveyors, often trained in religious rites, used a method called augury to determine the right orientation. This involved interpreting the flight of birds, the movement of the sun, and other signs believed to reveal divine will. Once the proper alignment was chosen, a symbolic boundary was marked on the ground, known as the templum. Within this sacred zone, geometry took over. Roman architects favoured symmetry, ratio, and balance. A temple's floor plan often followed strict mathematical relationships. The width of the building might relate to its height, or the spacing of the columns might match the size of the entrance. These proportions were not arbitrary. They were believed to reflect cosmic harmony. By aligning human construction with universal order, the Romans believed they were securing divine favour. The most important temples in Rome were located on the Capitoline Hill, including the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Built in the 6th century BCE and rebuilt several times, it was the spiritual anchor of the Republic and later the Empire. Its massive platform, 3 Kelly for Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, and prominent front-facing staircase set the standard for Roman temple design throughout the provinces. Temples were found not only in Rome, but in every Roman city. From the windswept hills of Britannia to the deserts of Egypt, temples served as visible symbols of Roman presence. In the former city of Carthage, now modern-day Tunis, Roman temples were built atop earlier Punic sites. In Gaul, temples replaced local shrines. The message was clear. Roman gods had arrived, and with them came Roman order. Inside, the temple was often empty. Roman worship did not center on congregation. Rituals were performed outside, on altars, where priests made offerings, read omens, and led processions. The inner chamber, often closed to the public, housed a statue of the god. It was a home for the divine, not a gathering space. The temple was both container and symbol, a carefully constructed vessel for cosmic authority. Materials mattered too. Temples were built with limestone, tuff, and later marble. Coloured stone was imported from across the empire. Red porphyry from Egypt, green serpentine from Greece, black basalt from Syria. These materials were chosen not just for beauty, but for meaning. Each colour, each texture, told a story of conquest and connection. Temples were also political. Emperors built them to legitimize their rule. Generals funded them to celebrate victories. Wealthy citizens paid for restorations to gain favour and status. A temple could immortalize a name in stone. Its steps were climbed by priests, senators, and emperors alike. Even in ruins, Roman temples speak. Their symmetry, scale, and sacred logic still hold the eye. They remind us that, to the Romans, architecture was never just about shelter. It was about shaping space to reflect the heavens, to order the city, and to remind every citizen that Rome was not only powerful, but divinely favoured. Chapter 4. The Forum and the Architecture of Power. At the centre of every Roman city stood a space unlike any other. It was not a marketplace, not a temple courtyard, not a street. It was all of these and more. It was the Forum, the beating heart of public life. To the Romans, the Forum was not only where decisions were made, it was where Rome revealed its identity. The Roman Forum, located between the Palatine and Capitoline hills, began as a marsh. In the 7th century BCE, it was drained using one of the earliest engineering feats in Roman history, the Cloaca Maxima, a great sewer carved through the land to redirect water to the Tiber River. Once dry, the open space quickly became a hub of activity. Here, traders laid out their goods, judges held trials in the open air, senators met beneath colonnades. Sacred processions passed through crowds of shouting citizens. Even as Rome's power grew, the Forum changed shape. New structures were added, not at random, but with careful purpose. Temples, basilicas, arches, and speaking platforms were arranged to frame the space. Every building had a function. Every column cast a political shadow. The space was no longer just a gathering point. It was a symbol of order and control. One of the most important architectural elements was the basilica. Originally used for business and legal affairs, the basilica was a large rectangular hall with rows of columns down its sides. These columns supported upper galleries and created aisles that guided movement. Light entered from clerestory windows high above, creating a dramatic play of shadow and illumination. The Basilica Aemilia, built in the 2nd century BCE, and the Basilica Julia, built by Julius Caesar and finished by Augustus, were both statements of stability and public order. In the middle of the Forum stood the rostra, a raised platform from which leaders addressed the people. This was not just a stage. It was the voice of Rome made stone. Behind it stood the Curia, the Senate House, where laws were debated and policy was shaped. The Curia Julia, still partially intact today, was a simple, solid building, rectangular in shape, but heavy with meaning. Its thick brick walls and high roof gave it a feeling of permanence. Decisions made inside echoed across the empire. Temples played their part too. The temple of Saturn guarded the state treasury. The temple of Castor and Pollux marked victories in battle. The temple of Vesta, with its round shape and eternal flame, reminded citizens of Rome's sacred origins. Even the steps of these temples were used, sometimes as meeting points, sometimes as makeshift stages for public announcements. Architecture and action were woven together. The Forum was also designed to impress. The Arch of Septimius Severus, erected in 203 CE, marked military victory in the east. Carved in marble, it towered over the crowd, filled with scenes of conquest. These arches did not serve practical purpose. They were there to speak, to declare triumph, to show the people what Rome had achieved. What made the Forum powerful was not just its structures, it was how those structures were arranged. The space created sightlines. From one spot, a citizen could see the Temple of Saturn, the Rostra, and the Curia. From another, the Capitoline Hill rose behind a speaker's back, giving visual weight to their words. This was no accident. The Forum was choreographed like a play. Every movement of people, every line of sight, meant to reinforce Roman values. Forums existed in every Roman city. Though smaller, they followed the same principles. A central square surrounded by public buildings, temples, markets, and monuments. The idea was the same: to build a space where civic life could be organized, controlled, and witnessed. In cities from Hispania to Judea, these forums carried the blueprint of Rome. In times of peace, the Forum hosted debates and celebrations. In times of crisis, it became a place of protest and mourning. Through it all, the building stood, watching, reminding everyone who held the power. The Forum was not just where Rome ruled, it was how Rome ruled, in stone, in space, and in spectacle. Chapter 5: The Roman House and the Language of Status. To the outsider, the Roman house might appear modest from the street. Its facade was often plain, with few windows and no outward sign of the wealth within, but this was by design. The true language of Roman status was not spoken outside, but revealed step by step, room by room, as one entered. Architecture became a script. Every space a line in a message about power, ancestry, and ambition. The typical elite Roman home was called a domus. It was not a private retreat, it was a social tool, a place to host clients, conduct politics, and display wealth. In many ways, the domus was a miniature forum, a controlled environment built to impress. The entrance led into the atrium, the central hall of the house. This space was open to the sky, with a square hole called the compluvium above, and a shallow pool below called the impluvium to catch rainwater. The atrium was both practical and symbolic. It brought light and water into the heart of the house and gave guests a first glimpse of the family's lineage. Portrait busts of ancestors lined the walls, reminding visitors that this was a home of tradition and honour. Beyond the atrium lay the tablinum, the master's office and reception area. Here, the head of the household, or paterfamilias, would receive guests and clients. Political favours were granted. Deals were made. A person's status in Rome was often reflected in the number of clients who came to call. The architecture supported this ritual. Spaces were arranged to manage the flow of people. Important guests passed straight through. Others were made to wait. Even the distance one was allowed to walk inside the house reflected one's standing. Behind the tablinum were the more private quarters. The peristyle garden, an open courtyard surrounded by columns, was a space for leisure and escape. Fountains splashed, birds chirped, and murals decorated the walls. Wealthy homes featured imported marble, intricate mosaics, and scenes from myth. Rooms opened around this garden, including dining rooms, bedrooms, and libraries. These spaces blended indoor and outdoor life, creating a sense of calm within the dense city. In larger homes, the triclinium served as the main dining room. Roman meals were long, and guests reclined on couches arranged in a U-shape around a central table. Wall paintings might show Dionysian revelry or scenes from Homer. The experience of dining was meant to be theatrical. Music, poetry, and conversation were part of the ritual. Even the choice of tableware spoke volumes. Silver dishes, bronze cups, and delicate glass bowls revealed the owner's wealth and taste. Not all Roman houses were alike. In cities like Pompeii and Herculaneum, archaeologists have uncovered a range of homes, from cramped apartments to sprawling villas. But even the smaller domus followed the same logic. The layout was meant to guide, to impress, and to assert identity. The home was an architectural performance, and the audience was everyone who stepped inside. In the countryside, the villa served a similar purpose but on a larger scale. Villas could stretch over dozens of rooms and several hectares or acres, depending on the region. They included baths, farms, libraries, and even theatres. These were places of retreat, but also of power. A well-run villa showed control over nature, land, and labour. It was a microcosm of Roman authority. Roman houses also reflected cultural mixing. In provinces from Gaul to North Africa, Roman-style homes appeared with local variations. Mosaic floors might show native gods alongside Roman ones. Columns mixed with regional styles, but the message remained the same. This was Roman civilization, brought to the edges of the known world. To live in a Roman domus was to live within a coded system. Every surface had meaning. Every room had a role. The walls spoke of lineage. The floors displayed wealth. The gardens hinted at philosophy. The house was not just a home, it was a mirror of the person who owned it. In Roman architecture, there were no accidents. The house was a crafted experience. And in its symmetry, its scale, and its symbolism, it told the world exactly who you were. Chapter 6: Baths, Leisure, and the Architecture of Cleanliness. To modernize, ancient Rome may not seem like a place of hygiene. Dusty streets, crowded tenements, and the hum of unwashed bodies suggest a world before sanitation. But this is misleading. No civilization of the ancient world invested more in public cleanliness, comfort, and health than the Romans. At the center of this effort stood the bathhouse, a marvel of architecture, engineering, and daily ritual. Roman baths, or thermae, were not just places to wash. They were social centers, business halls, libraries, gyms, and sanctuaries rolled into one. The bathhouse was where Romans came to exercise, relax, meet friends, and escape the pressures of urban life. For an empire that stretched across deserts, mountains, and coasts, the bathhouse became one of its most consistent signatures. To build a bath was to declare the presence of Roman order. Even modest towns had at least one public bathhouse. In Rome itself, there were over 900 private and public baths by the 4th century CE. But the most famous were the imperial complexes, vast structures of marble, brick, and concrete that could serve thousands of visitors each day. The baths of Caracalla, built in the early 3rd century CE, covered more than 25 hectares or 60 acres. Their vaulted roofs soared over 30 meters or nearly 100 feet into the air. Inside, visitors wandered among columns, statues, and fountains in spaces designed to awe as much as to cleanse. The layout of a Roman bath followed a typical sequence. Visitors first entered the upper diterium, or changing room, where they stored their belongings in wall niches. Next came the palaestra, an open courtyard for exercise. Here, men boxed, wrestled, and lifted weights. Some ran laps or practiced throwing the discus. After working up a sweat, they moved indoors for the actual bathing process. The baths progressed from cold to hot. The frigidarium was a large cold pool, often grand in scale and decoration. From there, bathers entered the tepidarium, a warm room with heated floors and walls. Finally, they reached the coldarium, the hottest chamber, heated by a system called the hypercaust. This ingenious setup used a furnace to channel hot air beneath raised floors and through hollow bricks in the walls, creating a dry and consistent heat. Workers called stokers, often enslaved, tended the fires in subterranean corridors, keeping the system running day and night. Bathing was followed by scraping the skin with a strigil, a curved metal tool, to remove sweat and oil. Soap was not commonly used. Instead, oils were applied before bathing and then scraped away along with dirt. Masseurs offered rub-downs. Barbers cut hair. Vendors sold refreshments. It was not unusual to spend hours at the bathhouse. The experience was communal, almost theatrical, and entirely Roman. Architecturally, the bathhouse was a triumph. Its vast interior spaces required complex engineering. Barrel vaults and domes allowed for large open rooms without interior columns. Windows made of translucent stone, such as selenite, allowed filtered light to enter while preserving warmth. Marble veneer and mosaic floors added beauty and cooling comfort. Water was supplied by aqueducts and managed with careful precision. Heated water tanks, cold plunge pools, and drainage systems all operated together in silent coordination. In the provinces, Roman baths followed the same principles. In what is now Bath in England, the ancient city of Aquae Sulis combined Roman bathing with local worship of healing waters. In North Africa, stone-built thermae stood amid the desert. From Gaul to Judea, bathing was not only available, it was expected. For the Romans, bathing was a rite. Even the poor had access to public baths for a small fee. Emperors often subsidized the entrance cost, and wealthy patrons built or restored baths as a gift to the people. To walk into a Roman bath was to participate in a shared civic identity. Here, rank dissolved. Senators and merchants bathed side by side, at least in theory. In practice, there were still divisions. Some baths had separate hours for men and women, others had side-by-side facilities. But the architecture aimed for unity. More than a place to get clean, the Roman bathhouse embodied ideals of health, balance, and civilization. It represented control over nature, mastery of water and fire, and the belief that the body, like the city, should be maintained, refined, and honoured. To sit in the caldarium, steam rising around carved stone, sunlight drifting through the dome, was to feel part of something vast and orderly. The bathhouse was not just architecture. It was a philosophy built in brick. Chapter 7. Arches, Domes, and the Engineering Revolution. If one architectural form defines the Roman genius, it is the arch. Not because the Romans invented it, but because they mastered it. They understood its strength, its beauty, and its potential to transform space. The arch, and all that followed from it, allowed Roman architecture to reach heights and spans no civilization had achieved before. It was not just an advance in building, it was a revolution. The power of the arch lies in its structure. Instead of bearing weight vertically like a post and beam, an arch distributes pressure outward and downward. This allowed the Romans to build bridges, aqueducts, gates, and vaults on a much larger scale. And it changed how people moved through space. An arch could frame a view, support a roof, or become a monument in its own right. By combining arches in series, Roman engineers created the barrel vault, a long tunnel-like ceiling that could cover enormous rooms. This was the basis of basilicas, bathhouses, and warehouses. Then they took a step further. By rotating a barrel vault around a central axis, they formed the dome. With this, space could rise above, vast and uninterrupted, creating interiors of awe and openness. The Romans also improved materials to match their ambition. Concrete, or opus cementitium, was the engine of this transformation. Mixed from lime, volcanic ash, water, and aggregate, Roman concrete could set underwater and grew stronger over time. Its flexibility allowed builders to mold shapes never possible with cut stone. Complex curves, soaring arches, and enormous domes became achievable. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Pantheon. Completed in the early 2nd century CE under the Emperor Hadrian, it remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. Its diameter measures over 43 meters, or about 142 feet. The dome rises to the same height as its width, forming a perfect hemisphere. At the top, a circular opening called the oculus, 9 meters wide, lets sunlight stream in. It is the only source of light. As the sun moves, it casts a beam that traces across the floor and walls, as if the building itself is measuring time. The dome is not solid. Its thickness decreases as it rises. The walls are heavier at the base, made from dense materials. Near the top, the concrete is lighter, mixed with volcanic pumice. This was intentional. Every detail was calculated to reduce stress and maintain balance. Coffers, or recessed panels, carved into the ceiling, reduce weight and add beauty. The effect is overwhelming. To stand beneath the dome is to feel suspended between heaven and earth. Domes spread across the empire. In bathhouses, market halls, and temples, curved ceilings became the signature of Roman interior design. But the principle behind them remained the same: strength through form, simplicity through material, elegance through engineering. The arch did more than support, it became a symbol. Triumphal arches, like those of Titus and Constantine in Rome, or the Arch of Timgad in modern-day Algeria, commemorated victory and empire. These were not gateways. They were stone narratives. Their surfaces were carved with scenes of conquest, parades, and divine favour. To walk beneath an arch was to enter history. Roman bridges and aqueducts relied on arches too. The Pont de Garde in southern France, built in the 1st century CE, carries water over a river using 3 tiers of arches. Still standing today, it showcases not only Roman technique, but Roman priorities: water, movement, and permanence. These were the goals of Roman engineering. In cities, arches opened walls and framed plazas. In amphitheatres, they supported multiple tiers of seating. In homes and palaces, they defined corridors and doorways. Arches were repeated, extended, and elevated until they became both structure and decoration. They made space feel grand without requiring excessive material. They allowed light and air to flow. They created rhythm and harmony. Even in decline, the legacy endured. Medieval cathedrals, Islamic mosques, and Renaissance domes all trace their lineage back to Roman forms. The very idea of what a building could be changed because of Rome's innovations in concrete and curved geometry. The arch and dome were more than tools. They were expressions of control, of balance, and of vision. They remind us that Roman architecture was not only built to last, it was built to inspire. Chapter 8: Cities and Urban Planning. Rome's greatness was not confined to the capital. It radiated outward, built in brick and stone, carried by law and language, and made visible through its cities. From the windswept hills of Britannia to the sands of North Africa, Roman cities followed a plan. They were ordered, geometric, and purposeful. Urban planning became a tool of empire, shaping landscapes into Roman image. Wherever the legions marched, cities followed. These were not mere settlements. They were strategic outposts, economic hubs, and instruments of Romanization. Each city was a statement. It said, "This land is Roman now." At the heart of Roman urban planning was the grid. Known as the centuriation system, it divided land into rectangular plots. Streets ran at right angles, forming a precise pattern of squares and rectangles. The two main roads were the Cardo and the Decumanus, running north to south and east to west. Their intersection marked the Forum, the city's core. Around it rose the temples, basilicas, and government buildings. This layout was not just efficient, it reflected Roman ideals. Order, symmetry, and hierarchy were embedded into the urban fabric. Streets varied in width according to their importance. Public spaces opened like stages, framed by columns and arches. Aqueducts brought water in. Drains carried waste out. Markets were organized. Movement was controlled. A Roman city was designed for daily ritual. Citizens walked familiar routes from home to bath, from temple to theatre. Military veterans settled in colonies designed to mirror Rome. Every stone echoed the capital. The further one travelled from Rome, the more valuable this consistency became. It gave the empire a sense of unity, a recognizable shape in foreign lands. The Forum was the city's focal point. Not merely a square, but a complex of spaces, civic, religious, and commercial. Statues stood at key sightlines. Public speeches were delivered from raised platforms. Trials were held beneath open skies. In the provinces, forums were often built atop earlier sacred sites, asserting Roman dominance without erasing local memory. Outside the Forum, residential zones followed the same logic. Insulae, or apartment blocks, housed the urban poor. These buildings could rise 4 or 5 stories, often made of wood and brick. Fires and collapses were common, especially in dense cities like Ostia or ancient Pompeii. Wealthier citizens lived in domus, private homes arranged around central courtyards. Villas on the city edge offered space, gardens, and privacy, with floor mosaics and painted walls that told stories of myth and power. Public amenities were placed with care. Bathhouses were centrally located and connected to aqueducts. Latrines lined main roads, positioned to drain efficiently. Amphitheatres were built at the city's edge to contain crowds. Temples often stood at elevated points, watching over the city like guardians. Everything had its place. Even cemeteries were arranged by design. Roman law forbade burials inside city walls, so tombs lined the roads just beyond. The Via Appia, leading south from Rome, became a corridor of memory. Funerary monuments told of family, profession, and military service. In death as in life, space carried meaning. Rome also planned for the unplanned. Cities adapted to terrain. In hilly regions, terracing created flat spaces for buildings. In marshy areas, like the early Roman Forum, engineers drained land with complex drainage systems. In desert climates, shade and ventilation were considered. Arched porticos and open courtyards helped manage heat. Local materials were used with Roman techniques, blending regional identity with imperial uniformity. Time layered these cities. What began as a military camp might evolve into a provincial capital. Temporary wooden structures gave way to stone temples, brick walls, and paved streets. Over centuries, cities were rebuilt, repaved, and reimagined, yet the underlying plan often remained intact. Beneath modern cities like Cologne, Barcelona, and Lyon lie the bones of Roman planning. Rome's urban vision was deeply practical, but it was also psychological. The city taught citizens how to be Roman. It created routines, expectations, and visual cues. The straight street, the open forum, the temple on high ground, these were not just features, they were lessons. They instructed, subtly but firmly, in the Roman way. More than 2,000 years later, the echoes remain. City grids, public squares, zoning laws, even our ideas of civic space, all carry traces of Roman planning. What Rome built was not just cities, it built a system for living. Chapter 9. Marble: Beauty, Power, and Provenance. Marble was more than just a building material in ancient Rome. It was a symbol of power, of beauty, of empire. To touch marble was to touch the very bones of Rome's ambition. Cold, smooth, and luminous, marble shaped not only the temples and monuments of the empire, but also the message those buildings carried. Rome did not just build with marble, it conquered it, transported it, carved it, and displayed it as a badge of pride. In the early Republic, Roman builders made do with local stone. Tufa and travertine, both easy to quarry and shape, were the foundation of many early structures. But as Rome expanded, so did its appetite. The conquest of Greece in the 2nd century BCE opened the gates to a new aesthetic. From the Greek islands came white marble with a crystalline purity, unlike anything found in Italy. Most prized was the marble from Paros and Pentelicon, used in Athens for the Parthenon. The Romans not only admired it, they took it. Entire columns were transported across the Mediterranean, reused in Roman temples and basilicas as both ornament and trophy. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman elite had developed a taste for coloured marble. From Asia Minor came deep green serpentine and vibrant red porphyry. From Egypt, black and gold-speckled stones. From Tunisia and Algeria, yellow marble with swirling veins. From what is now Turkey, purple and pink breccia. These stones were rare and difficult to quarry. But that was the point. The further the stone travelled, the more it demonstrated Rome's reach. Quarrying marble was a monumental task. At sites like Carrara in northern Italy, workers carved blocks directly from the mountain face. Using iron wedges, chisels, and hammers, they cut deep channels around massive slabs. Water-soaked wooden wedges were inserted into cracks. As the wood expanded, it split the stone free. These blocks could weigh several tons. Moving them was a challenge of engineering. Wooden sledges dragged by oxen or teams of labourers carried them to rivers or coastlines. From there, specially designed ships with flat decks and reinforced hulls transported them across seas to Rome and other cities. The port of Ostia became a marble gateway. Cranes lifted blocks onto carts. Workers marked the stones with their origin and destination. Once in Rome, the transformation began. Stonecutters trimmed the blocks. Sculptors shaped columns, capitals, and statues. Artisans polished surfaces with sand and stone powders until they gleamed. The result was not only structural, but theatrical. Marble shimmered in sunlight. It cooled the hand and delighted the eye. Inside temples and basilicas, coloured marbles were arranged in geometric patterns. Floors became mosaics of imperial geography. Green from Sparta, yellow from Numidia, red from Egypt, white from Carrara. A walk across a Roman floor was a walk across the empire. Walls were clad in thin sheets of polished marble, held in place by iron clamps and bronze pins. Ceilings were framed with gilded mouldings, reflecting the sheen below. Marble was no longer just a material, it was an experience. Even statues once made in bronze were increasingly carved from marble. This was partly fashion, partly practicality. Bronze was expensive and could be melted down. Marble was permanent. In tombs and forums, likenesses of emperors, generals, and gods stood in frozen perfection. The medium carried weight. In a world without photography, marble was the closest thing to immortality. The choice of marble in a building was deeply political. Augustus famously declared that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. His building program flooded the capital with white stone, reshaping its identity. Later, emperors competed with ever more exotic imports. Domitian rebuilt the Palatine Hill with coloured marble interiors. Hadrian's villa used stones from across the empire in a single hallway. These choices were not aesthetic alone. They were statements of wealth and permanence. In the provinces, marble told a subtler story. Temples in modern-day Turkey or Syria might feature one or two imported columns surrounded by local stone. These served as visual anchors linking the building to Rome. Even a small amount of imperial marble could Romanize a landscape. Over time, the use of marble declined. As the empire fractured, long-distance trade grew difficult. Quarries closed. Ships stopped sailing. Recycled marble became common. Older buildings were stripped, statues defaced. But the memory of marble remained. Medieval builders reused it in cathedrals. Renaissance artists studied it for inspiration. The message it once carried of empire carved in stone still echoes. To the ear, marble is silent, but to the eye and the hand, it speaks volumes. It tells of mountains cut, seas crossed, and power made visible. In the architecture of Rome, marble was more than beautiful, it was imperial proof. Chapter 10. Roads, Bridges, and the Flow of Empire. To walk a Roman road was to walk on order, power, and intention. These roads did not merely connect towns, they connected minds, markets, legions, and laws. They were the arteries of an empire, paved with purpose, reaching from Britannia to the sands of modern-day Iraq. More than 400,000 kilometres, or about 250,000 miles, of roads crisscrossed the Roman world. Of these, over 80,000 kilometres were stone-paved highways, engineered to last centuries. At the centre stood Rome itself. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was not just poetic, it was logistical. The golden milestone stood in the Roman Forum, marking the point from which all roads were measured. Every road had a practical purpose: speed of communication, movement of troops, trade, and taxation. But together, they created something larger, a sense of Roman presence. The process of building a road was deliberate and layered. Surveyors first laid out the route with tools like the gromer and chorobates. Engineers then cut deep trenches, sometimes more than a metre or 3 feet into the ground. Layers followed. At the base came compacted earth or sand. Above that, gravel and crushed stone. Then large stones fitted together without mortar formed the surface. The road crowned in the centre to allow water to drain, with ditches lining both sides. Roads were built to endure. Roman engineers understood terrain. In hilly regions, they carved steps into the slope. In swamps, they drove piles of timber to form solid foundations. Roads often took the straightest path, regardless of obstacles. The result was a network that moved armies faster than their enemies could prepare. It also moved goods, ideas, and taxes with impressive efficiency. Along the roads, mile markers, one every Roman mile, about 1.5 kilometres or 0.9 miles, gave distances and maintenance data. Rest stations called mansiones offered shelter, food, and fresh horses for official couriers. The cursus publicus, Rome's state-run postal system, could move a message over 80 kilometres or 50 miles in a single day. No ancient civilization moved faster. But Roman infrastructure did not stop at land. Bridges made roads unstoppable. Archers carried them over rivers, gorges, and valleys. One of the earliest and most impressive was the Pons Fabricius in Rome, still in use today, spanning the Tiber since 62 BCE. Its volcanic stone blocks and twin arches speak to a balance of form and strength. Outside the capital, bridges multiplied. In Gaul, Hispania, and Anatolia, stone bridges crossed rivers that once formed barriers between cultures. These structures often bore inscriptions dedicating them to emperors or gods. They were both utility and monument. The Pont du Gard in southern France remains a masterpiece. Though technically an aqueduct bridge, it carried a road along its upper level. Its triple tiers of arches soar over the Gardon River, built without mortar, yet holding firm for 2,000 years. To cross it was to enter the Roman world. In cities, bridges stitched neighbourhoods together. In the countryside, they brought isolated farms and forts into the system. They were the missing links that turned isolated towns into provinces and provinces into a functioning empire. The symbolism was clear. Roads and bridges did not just serve the state. They were the state. Soldiers marched along them. Governors arrived with scrolls of law. Tax collectors moved with security. Temples and forums were supplied by the very roots that Rome had laid. Every stone underfoot whispered a message. You are within the reach of Rome. Trade thrived along these arteries. Olive oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul, grain from Egypt, and glass from Syria flowed toward Rome. The flow reversed with silver coins, military gear, and imperial propaganda sent outward. Roads allowed culture to travel. Latin spread not by scholars, but by merchants, soldiers, and craftsmen walking familiar paths. Even rebellions were shaped by the roads. Spartacus followed them in his escape. Boudica used them in her march. Roman roads gave rebels the same access and speed they offered to legions, but the empire always reclaimed them. Roads, once taken, were taken back, repaired, patrolled, reinforced. As centuries passed and the empire declined, roads fell into disrepair. Some were scavenged for stone. Chapter 11. The Legacy of Roman Architecture. 2,000 years have passed since Rome ruled the known world, yet its architectural legacy still surrounds us. It lives not only in broken columns and sunlit ruins, but in the shape of our cities, in the arches of bridges, in the domes of churches, and in the very idea that architecture can express power, order, and eternity. Roman architecture did not vanish with the fall of the Western Empire in 476 CE. It transformed. The knowledge of concrete, once lost to time, was rediscovered in the Renaissance, when builders began to study ancient Roman texts and sketch the ruins that still dotted the Italian landscape. Architects like Brunelleschi and Palladio looked to Roman ideals of symmetry and proportion. They reinterpreted Roman forms for Christian cathedrals and civic buildings. The Renaissance gave birth to neoclassicism, a style that swept through Europe and into the Americas. In Paris, Washington, London, and Berlin, the fingerprints of Roman ideals are visible. The United States Capitol, the British Museum, and the Pantheon in Paris all borrow from Roman temples. Columns, porticos, domes, and arches became the visual language of law, order, and reason. Roman methods also endured beneath the surface. Sewer systems, aqueduct principles, and road engineering all shaped later developments. When European engineers in the 18th and 19th centuries began building national infrastructures, they were standing on Roman foundations, both literally and intellectually. In the 20th century, fascist regimes in Italy and Germany attempted to revive Roman grandeur for their own ends, constructing vast concrete buildings meant to echo the imperial scale of the Caesars. But architecture does not obey ideology. It speaks through form, not slogans. And Rome's true legacy lies not in conquest, but in construction. The legacy is also spiritual. Roman basilicas, once bustling administrative halls, became the model for Christian churches. The layout of central naves, side aisles, and apses is still used today. The Vatican itself is built atop ancient Roman tombs and is filled with columns and arches that would not be out of place in a Roman forum. Even in language, Rome left its mark. Words like forum, dome, vault, and basilica entered the vocabulary of architecture. The idea that a city should be planned, that streets should follow a grid, that public space belongs to the people, are all Roman ideals that echo across time. Yet the true miracle of Roman architecture lies in its endurance. Walk through the Pantheon in Rome today, its dome still intact after nearly 2,000 years. The oculus above, open to the sky, invites the sun and rain, just as it did under Emperor Hadrian. The concrete has not cracked. The proportions still inspire awe. In Nimes, France, the Roman arena still hosts concerts. In Split, Croatia, the Palace of Diocletian is now a thriving old town. In Turkey, Syria, and North Africa, Roman amphitheatres, aqueducts, and roads are still used by local communities, layered with centuries of life and memory. Roman architecture was never just about stone. It was about vision. A vision of an empire that could shape space to reflect power, purpose, and permanence. That vision proved stronger than the empire itself. Though the legions faded, the arches remained. Though emperors died, the domes they raised continued to inspire. We live in a world Rome helped build, not by force but by form, by the idea that architecture is more than shelter. It is culture, it is identity, it is legacy. And as long as we build bridges, raise domes, and carve public spaces into the heart of our cities, Rome is not gone. It is simply waiting, in stone and shadow, to be remembered. You've been listening to History's Edge, where we bring the ancient world to life through immersive, fact-driven audio storytelling. If you enjoyed this journey through the architecture of Rome, we'd be honoured if you subscribed to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating documentaries that are calm, clear, and built to last, just like the Romans would have liked it. Thank you for listening. And remember, history isn't behind us. It's beneath us, waiting to be rediscovered.